be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. What is your life worth? What is your life worth living for? Or what are you living your life for? Or put one other way, what do you want out of your life? When I put it this way, it seems like drastic questions, right? Like you're sitting in front of a guidance counselor or a career counselor, and they're trying to get you focused about what you're going to put on your resume. But these, my friends, are questions that all of us answer, whether we think about them or not. Whether we go through life unaware, unexamined, unplanned, like we're on remote control and we're the one not holding the remote control. Or we choose. We make a definite choice. This is what I want. But either way, we've made a choice. You might be thinking to yourself, how can I know what I think my life is worth living for? Well, actually, you can by counting. You can look at the time in your life. Like actually look at your daily planner and see what you spend your time on. You can open up, well, not your checkbook anymore, but you can get your credit card statement and see, this is where I spend my money. Then there's a little deeper. Your effort. What in your life draws your enthusiasm? What gets you out of bed in the morning, picking up the phone when it rings and going out the door rather than just staying home? Then it gets a little harder. If you can follow the thoughts of your mind, what do you tend to think about when you're left to your own devices? What's on your mind? Then the easy one, who do you hang out with? Who is your circle? You look back on your life at the forks in your road, and we all have forks in the road. Which ones did you take? Are there patterns to those choices? It's a lot like a salmon swimming upriver to spawn. They choose this branch, and then they choose that branch, and they choose that branch. The path you take points you to the spawning bed of and what your life is about. Now, so many of us, at one time or another, live unexamined lives. We just grow up with the life that our parents offered us, and that's all we can see. That's all we can imagine. I mean, it's hard for me, growing up in my life, to imagine being a villager in Uganda, for example. Not that that's my aspiration in life, but I couldn't even begin to imagine what that would be like. So we try to live what we know, and that's what we give our life to. Now, every adult on this earth, life is about putting food on the table, keeping a roof over your head, raising children to adulthood if you had them, and getting enjoyment out of life. Enjoyment in your work, enjoyment in your family, enjoyment in your community. And then finally, to get back to the first 4 commandments, celebrating life. No one goes through life not celebrating life. Now, whether you call it faith, or whether you recognize the holiness, or whether you just call it appreciation, everyone everywhere celebrates the fact at some point that they enjoy being alive. Now, on top of that sort of baseline, which is about 90% of life, right? Some people say, well, my country is something worth giving my life to. And millions of people have done it. Or an idea, a cause, a political party, my business. This is worth giving my life to. If life is more than just putting a roof over your head, well, about comfort and security, about saving money and investing money so that I can do other things and be secure. For some of us, it's about fame and esteem, right? We just love to be in front of the spotlight. Now, as part of my life of becoming a pastor, life forced me to look at my life. And I can trace the forks in my road and the choices I made. So I know that for much of the first 40 years of my life, it was devoted to my family of origin. My energy was there. And also on top of that, I spent 25 years devoted to being a doctoral student and a professor. And then for the last 25 years, my life has been devoted to the church. And for 20 years, my life has been devoted to my wife and our kids. And for a long time, because those are big, right? That takes all your time. I was trying to squeeze in on the side what I'll say, the things that nurture my soul. Like going fishing, doing yoga, going running, having friends, right? That sort of thing. So we look to Paul this morning, and he spells out exactly what his life has been all about. His life, Paul's life, has all been about his faith. But his idea of faith and our idea of faith are often very different ideas about faith, because faith for Paul is not something that he just does on Friday nights and high holy days. Because we got to remember, Paul's not a Christian. Paul's a Jew who met the risen Christ. And he had both of those things going at the same time. Talk about two biggies, right? Paul's faith is his identity. Like if I were to walk up to you, say I was a person and you happen to be going to Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, right? And someone walks up to you and says, "Who are you?" Well, I'm Max Olmstead. Well, who are you? I'm an American. Right? That might be the first thing you say. I'm an American, as if they didn't recognize that seeing me. But for Paul, his faith is his ethnicity. He's a Hebrew among Hebrew of the tribe of Benjamin. This is the first and most important thing. And his whole identity is shaped by his circumcision, which we feel as odd, but his life was committed by his parents on the 8th day to be faithful to the God of Abraham. His life, his education and training is to be a Pharisee, to follow the law meaning the Torah. And how did he live his life? Paul's not shy. Blamelessly. I have made no faults in following the law. And his ambition in life, I know this sounds strange, is to persecute the church. Right? Paul started off his career as being the guy who was running around gathering up Christians because he thought that this new form of Judaism was going to ruin his way of being Jewish. With Paul, there are no side diversions or channels. Paul was a salmon who went straight upstream and leapt over waterfalls and powered through the currents towards his goal. But then, as we know from another passage in the book of Acts, in a flash, quite literally, on the road to Damascus, he was going to Damascus to persecute the church. He came face to face with the risen Christ. And just like that, all of that life force, the ancestry, the ethnicity, the commitment, the education, training, his lifestyle, how he spent his days, his ambition, was redirected to knowing Christ and the power of the resurrection, to share in his sufferings and to become like Christ in his death. He redirected so much that he considered everything that he'd given his life to before to be rubbish. It's rubbish in our translation because we can't use the impolite word, which actually is dung, is what Paul said these things. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Paul had a worthy life. Paul was a good citizen, an honorable life. Everyone looked up to Paul. He studied with the best teachers, a socially esteemed life. If you want to know where Paul was, he was in synagogue on Friday night. He was at prayer. He was reading his Bible. His life was full of achievement. He was one of the most educated people of his time. He knew what he wanted, he chose, and he made his way forward, and all of a sudden it's rubbish. It would be not unlike any of us, leaving worthy American lives, right? We have a family, we have a career, we have wealth, comfort, and security. We might have community esteem. We're meeting goals in our lives, or we've met them. And we wake up one day, and we suddenly see that all that time, all the years we spent working, like 25 years I spent becoming a professor. All that time working towards it. All the money, right, that you spent getting what you wanted. All the enthusiasm and effort, right? The 40 hours a week, or if you're in a law firm, the 70 million hours a week trying to become a partner, right? Not to mention becoming a doctor. All the roads taken and the roads not taken, right? When the roads diverged in the woods, sometimes we look back and think, what might have been if I'd gone that way? And we think to ourselves, rubbish? That there's something much more my life should be about? Now, I've told this story before in the 14 years I've been your pastor, but not all of you have been here 14 years, and you might have missed it the Sunday I told it. So I'm going to tell it again. 25 years ago, as I said, I was a professor of Scandinavian languages and literature, teaching Vikings and Old Norse, Swedish language. And on the second Sunday of Advent, I was in church at the First Congregational Church of Boulder, and the preacher was preaching the Great Commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind. And he stopped. He asked us to close our eyes and said, so how are you doing with this one? And in an instant, I realized I had no idea what he was talking about. Gone to church all my life. Love God. How do I go about that? Was that like loving my parents or my dog? My friends, my spouse? I didn't have a spouse. And I realized that all the love I had in my life was going to being a professor. Everything. All my time, all my effort, all my energy. That's all I thought about, except for fishing, because I was in Colorado. But literally, that was it. I was the professor. My God was academia. What am I supposed to do? Am I going to change how I feel? Am I going to change how I think? Is my disposition? So here comes the crazy part. I resigned. And I went to seminary back here in Massachusetts. But I went out to find how to love God. I didn't go there to learn how to be a pastor. I ended up being a pastor, which turned out to be a pretty good thing for me and some other people. But I wanted to know Christ and the power of the resurrection. I wanted to find out what sharing in his sufferings was about. I wanted to become like Christ in his death, and I didn't know what any of that meant. So I started. I started by learning how to open up myself to God through things like contemplative practices. And all these words come across as like big mumbo-jumbo terms, but I didn't want to think about God. I wanted to be with God, right? It's like the difference about looking at someone you love's picture on your desk and holding their hand. So I practiced various kinds of prayers. I read spiritual autobiographies of all the people from various traditions who had walked closely with God, and I wanted to see if I could do what they did, follow in their footsteps. I was like a salmon coming in from the sea, and I was finding my way up the river. And what I discovered was that God and Jesus were already all around me. In the very ordinary, I didn't have to go anywhere. They were in all of you. They were in me. It wasn't so much about getting rid of everything else, but rather about taking, and this sounds a little bragging, but the enormous life force that is Max Olmstead, and that's the one thing I can say about myself, is I'm energetic. All that energy I'm giving to all those areas and sweeping them all together and moving it to knowing Christ and the power of the resurrection. In my family, in the church. It's a state of heart. How you see, how you know. Which is where all the striving and suffering came in, because normal life, as we live it, with all its concerns and preoccupations, those are all the other gods, right? Those other things that we think about in our life, those are our other gods. And I tell you, I've had them, right? Academia, the PhD. Even the church can be my other God, because there's a difference between running a church and knowing Christ. Any of you who've sat in any of our meetings will know the difference. And all of those preoccupations of life are like a surging wave or a veil that comes over us and cloaks God and the holy so we can't see anymore. One of my favorite Buddhists is a woman named Pema Chodron. And she wrote this: "We sow the seeds of our future hell or happiness by the way we open or close our minds right now. We sow the seeds of our future hell or happiness by the way we open or close our minds right now." My friends, to know the power of the resurrection, to see life coming out of death, possibility out of impossibility, love out of fear, to have confidence in all circumstances. You see, too often when people preach this text, it's an all or nothing thing. You got to be like Paul. You got to throw it all away. He didn't throw those things away. He brought them along with him. He bragged about those things. But to redirect all of your life force towards knowing Christ and the power of the resurrection. Imagine that. May it be so.